Sister stood up in the middle of the courtroom and pointed at me. She forged Dad's signature, she said. She manipulated a sick old man and stole everything that belongs to this family. I didn't move. I didn't flinch. I just looked at her and then I reached into the folder on the table in front of me and I set one single piece of paper in front of my attorney. I said nothing. And that was the moment everything changed. My father's name was Leonard. Leonard Pruitt. He was a retired electrician from Dayton, Ohio who drove the same 2003 F-150 until the transmission gave out, who kept a coffee can full of spare change on top of the refrigerator, and who once drove 4 hours in a snowstorm to help me move into my first apartment after college. He did it without being asked. That was just who he was. He died on a Tuesday in March, 11 months before I found myself sitting in that courtroom. He had a massive stroke in his sleep. The hospice nurse called me at 4:37 in the morning. By the time I got to the house, his hands were already cold. My sister Lydia was not there. Neither was my brother Cal. I was the one who had been driving 40 minutes each way, 3 times a week for the last 2 years of his life. I was the one who learned how to manage his medications after the first stroke left his left side weak. I was the one who rearranged my work schedule, canceled vacations, missed my best friend's bachelorette weekend in Nashville because Dad had a fall and I couldn't leave him. I'm not saying that to make myself sound like a saint. I'm saying it because later, in that courtroom, my family tried very hard to make it sound like none of it ever happened. Dad had a house, nothing fancy, a 3-bedroom ranch on Clement Drive that he and my mother had bought in 1987 for $84,000. My mother passed when I was 19. After that, it was just the 3 of us kids and him. The house was worth about $340,000 by the time he died. Not a fortune. But enough to matter, apparently. 6 weeks after the funeral, I got a letter from an attorney I had never heard of. The letter informed me that Leonard Pruitt had executed a new will in November, 4 months before his death, during a period when he was recovering from a second minor stroke and could barely hold a pen, and that in this new will. The house and all remaining assets were to be split equally among all 3 children, rather than left primarily to me as specified in the original will he had drafted 8 years prior. I read the letter twice. Then I sat down on my kitchen floor. I called Lydia, she didn't answer. I called Kodia. She didn't answer. I called Cal. He picked up on the 3rd ring and the first thing he said was, "We thought it was fair, Wren." Wren. That's me. My full name is Wren Pruitt. My father called me Wren Bird when I was little. Standing in my kitchen holding my phone, hearing my brother say my name in that flat, defensive tone, I felt something go cold in my chest that hasn't fully thawed since. "Did you tell him to change it?" I asked. Silence. "Cal, we just had a conversation with him," he said. "We had a right to do that. He had a second stroke in September. He was on blood thinners and a steroid taper. You had a conversation with him? He was competent," Cal said. The attorney certified it. I hung up. I should explain the original will because it matters. Dad had made his intentions clear long before he got sick. He had told all 3 of us separately, more than once, that he planned to leave the house to me, not because he loved me more, but because I was the one who lived closest, the one who he knew would keep it in the family, and because he felt that my contributions to his care should be recognized in some concrete way. I never asked him to do that. Honestly, a part of me was uncomfortable with it. But he was firm. He updated his will in 2016 with an estate attorney named Mr. Dote, alderman out of Dayton, and the language was specific, the house and primary assets to me, with smaller cash distributions to Lydia and Cal. Lydia had never seemed to care much about it, or at least that's what I believed. I was wrong. I hired my own attorney, a woman named Ms. Melv Fowler, who had been doing estate litigation for 22 years and who had a very calm, very measured way of explaining catastrophic things to you. She told me that contesting a will was difficult. She told me that proving undue influence was even harder. She told me the legal fees could get expensive. "But," she said, setting down her pen, "what you're describing, a man with documented cognitive decline, 2 strokes in 4 months, executing a new will that contradicts a clearly stated prior intent. That's a case worth looking at." I gave her everything I had, medical records, caregiver logs I had kept out of habit, just detailed notes in a spiral notebook about Dad's medications, his moods, his good days and bad days. Texts between me and his doctors. A voicemail from my father from the previous Christmas where he told me in his own voice exactly how he wanted things handled. What I also gave her was something I hadn't told anyone about yet. For the last 8 months of my father's life, starting after the first stroke when I began to worry about exactly this kind of situation, I had been recording our conversations. Not secretly in a manipulative way. I had a voice recorder app on my phone that I used when we talked about his wishes, his finances, his medical preferences. I recorded it because I wanted documentation. Because I was a 31-year-old woman managing her father's end-of-life care alone, and I knew, even then, that I might need proof someday. I had 46 recordings. I did not tell Lydia or Cal about them. I did not post anything on social media. I did not call anyone to vent. I just kept showing up to my attorney's office and handing over what I had, piece by piece. Lydia filed suit 4 months after the funeral. The claim was that the original 2016 will should be enforced. But then her attorney pivoted, arguing that that will had been the product of undue influence, that I had pressured our father into changing his will by making myself indispensable to his care. Read that again. She was accusing me of the exact thing she had done, but in reverse and from a distance. My mother's older sister, my Aunt Colleen, called me when she heard. She was furious. She had known my father for 40 years, and she told me she would testify if I needed her. I appreciated it. I didn't end up needing her. The months leading up to the hearing were the worst of my life. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't sleeping more than 4 or 5 hours a night. I lost weight I didn't have to lose. There was a period in October where I would get in my car to drive to work and just sit in the parking garage for 20 minutes before I could make myself go in, not crying, just sitting. Hollow. I want to be honest about that because I think sometimes these stories get told like the person at the center of them was always strong, always composed, always 3 steps ahead. I wasn't. I was exhausted and grieving and furious and scared, sometimes all at once, sometimes in different combinations at 2 in the morning when I couldn't turn my brain off. What I had was the recordings. And I had Miss Fowler. And I had the spiral notebook. And I had the memory of my father's voice on the phone that Christmas, clear and certain, telling me what he wanted. That had to be enough. The hearing was on a Thursday in February. The courtroom was smaller than I expected. Wood paneling, fluorescent lights, the smell of old carpet and coffee. My brother Cal sat next to Lydia on the other side of the room. He looked at me once when I walked in. Then he looked away. Their attorney was a man named Mr. Phelps. He was polished in a way that felt slightly hostile, the kind of polish that communicates that he has done this many times and that he finds you mildly tedious. He had a stack of documents and a way of speaking that made everything sound like it had already been decided. He called Lydia to speak first. She talked about our father's decline. She talked about how much she had worried from a distance. She lives in Charlotte. She mentioned that, as if geography was something that had happened to her. She said she had called Dad regularly. She said she had concerns about my influence over him. She used the word isolated twice. She said I had cut them off from him. That last part made my hands grip the edge of the table. I thought about the Sunday in August when Dad asked me why Lydia never came to visit anymore, and I told him she was probably just busy. I thought about the birthday in June when Cal sent a gift card and didn't call. I thought about the countless times I had encouraged my father to reach out to both of them, had even offered to set up video calls, had texted them myself asking if they wanted updates on his health. I had screenshots of those texts. Mr. Phelps then began making his argument about the 2016 will. He was suggesting that because I was the primary caregiver, I had an outsized influence on my father's decisions. That the will favoring me was therefore suspect. It was a reasonable-sounding argument. It was also completely backwards from reality. Miss Fowler let him finish. She had this quality I came to deeply respect. She never interrupted, never visibly reacted, never gave anything away. She just listened with her hands folded and her eyes steady. Then it was her turn. She walked the judge through the medical records first. The timeline of my father's strokes. The documentation of his cognitive state. The notes from his neurologist in October, the month before the new will was signed, describing mild executive function impairment and recommending reduced stress and limited major decision-making. The judge, a quiet man named Judge Hargrove who wore reading glasses on the end of his nose and took handwritten notes, looked up at that. Then Miss Fowler said she had audio recordings she wished to submit as evidence. The room changed, not loudly, nobody gasped or stood up. But something shifted. Lydia leaned toward Mr. Phelps. Cal sat up straighter. Even Judge Hargrove set his pen down. Miss Fowler played 4 of the recordings. Just 4, out of 46. The first was from the previous December. My father's voice, unmistakably his, talking about the house. I want you to have it, Wren. I've been clear about that for years. I'm not confused about this. I know what I want. The second was from January when I had asked him directly if anyone had talked to him about changing his will. There was a pause. Then he said, "Your sister called me. She was upset. I told her my decision was made." Another pause. She called 3 more times after that. The third was from February. My father sounded more tired in this one. He said, "I don't want to cause a fight. Maybe I should just," and then he stopped himself. Then he said, "No. No, I know what's right. I know what you've done for me." The fourth was from June, 5 months before the new will was signed, and in it my father, unprompted, said he was worried that his other children were going to try to change things after he was gone. He said it plainly. He said he was glad he had the documentation in place. The courtroom was silent when Ms. Fowler clicked off the recorder. I looked straight ahead. I did not look at Lydia. I did not look at Cal. Mr. Phelps asked for a recess. The judge granted 20 minutes. I went to the bathroom and ran cold water over my wrists the way I used to do before swim meets in high school when I was nervous. I looked at myself in the mirror for a long time. I looked tired. I looked like someone who had been carrying something very heavy for a very long time. When we came back in, Mr. Phelps requested more time to review the recordings. Judge Hargrove said they had been properly submitted and authenticated and that the proceeding would continue. The judge asked Lydia's attorney a few pointed questions about the November will signing, about who had initiated the meeting with the new attorney, about how my father had been transported to that appointment, about whether his primary physician had been consulted. The answers were not good. It turned out my father had been driven to the appointment by Cal. The new attorney, a solo practitioner who had since retired, had not reviewed my father's medical history. There was no independent assessment of cognitive capacity. The 2 witnesses who signed the document were Cal's coworkers. None of this had been disclosed in the original filing. I didn't say anything. I sat very still in my chair and I listened to the proceeding unravel, methodically and without drama, like a seam coming apart under steady pressure. Judge Hargrove ruled from the bench. He did not take it under advisement or schedule a follow-up. He ruled that day, in that room, with my brother and sister sitting 10 feet away from me. He found that the November will had been executed under circumstances that raised serious questions about capacity and undue influence. He found the 2016 will to be the valid governing document. He noted, in language that was careful but unmistakable, that the audio recordings provided substantial evidence of my father's intent and of external pressure being applied in the months preceding the contested signing. The house was mine. The legal fees were mine too. Ms. Reschen, Fowler helped me figure out the numbers. It wasn't nothing, but it was manageable. And I had what I came for. Lydia left the courtroom without looking at me. Cal paused near the door. I thought for a moment he was going to say something. He opened his mouth. Then he closed it. Then he walked out. My Aunt Colleen had driven up from Cincinnati to sit in the back row, just in case. She met me in the hallway outside and hugged me so hard I could feel it in my back. She smelled like the same perfume she has always worn, and I held on longer than I probably needed to. "Your father would be so angry," she said, pulling back and looking at me. "I know," I said. "And so proud," she said. I nodded. I didn't trust my voice. I live in the house on Clement Drive now. I moved in 4 months after the ruling. I painted the kitchen the same soft yellow my mother had always wanted but never gotten around to choosing. I kept my father's coffee can of spare change on top of the refrigerator. I didn't count what was in it. I just kept it there. My father's chair is still in the living room, the worn one near the window where he used to read the paper in the morning. I sit in it sometimes when the light is right, in the early afternoon when it comes in at a low angle through the west-facing window and turns everything amber and slow. I don't talk to Lydia. I don't talk to Cal. I don't think about them as often as you might expect. There are whole weeks now where they don't cross my mind at all, and that's not a coping mechanism or a wall I've built. It just became the natural shape of things, the way a river eventually settles into the path that makes sense. What I think about is my father. I think about the drive through the snowstorm. I think about the coffee can. I think about his voice in those recordings. The way he paused before he said things, the particular cadence he had when he was being deliberate, when he wanted to make sure the person on the other end understood exactly what he meant. He knew what he wanted. He had always known. He just needed someone to write it down, and when the time came, I was glad I had. A few weeks after I moved in, I was unpacking boxes in the back bedroom, the one that used to be Cal's, which I've turned into a home office, and I found a shoebox on the top shelf of the closet behind some old winter coats. Inside it were letters, dozens of them, rubber banded together, all addressed to me in my father's handwriting, dated over a span of about 5 years. He had never sent them. They were just letters he had written and kept. The most recent one was dated about a year before he died. In it, he said he was proud of the person I had become. He said he hoped he had told me enough times while he was alive. He said he was sorry for the times he hadn't. He signed it the same way he always signed birthday cards when we were growing up. Love, Dad. I sat down on the floor of that empty room and I stayed there for a long time. Not crying exactly. Not crying either. Just sitting with it, with him. With the particular weight of being loved well by someone who is gone. The house settled around me in the late afternoon, quiet. Outside, the neighbor's dog was barking at something in the yard. Somewhere down the street, a kid was riding a bike. I was home. I thought a lot about what actually happened in that courtroom. Not the legal part, the human part. Because what Lydia and Cal did wasn't just about the house, it was about rewriting the story, making me the villain so they didn't have to sit with the fact that they hadn't shown up. That's the thing about people who choose absence. Eventually, the absence has to become someone else's fault. Otherwise, they'd have to look at themselves. I don't say that with anger anymore. I say it because I think it's true, and because understanding it was the only way I stopped losing sleep over it. What I keep coming back to is the recordings. Not as a legal strategy. I didn't start making them because I was planning some courtroom moment. I started making them because I was scared and I was alone and I wanted to hold on to my father's words in a real, concrete way. I wanted proof that these conversations happened. That he was real. That what we had was real. There was something almost unbearable about watching someone decline and knowing that the details, the specific things he said, the way he said them, were going to slip away no matter how hard you tried to hold on. So I held on the only way I knew how. I pressed record. And the thing is, that came from love, not strategy. It came from grief that started before he was even gone. I think that matters. I think the actions that end up protecting us most are rarely the ones we take out of calculation. They're the ones we take because we're trying to do right by someone, because we refuse to let something true get lost. Lydia called me manipulative. She said I had engineered the whole situation. But here's what I know. I drove 40 minutes each way 3 times a week for 2 years. I managed his medications. I sat with him through bad nights. I made sure he had what he needed. You cannot fake that. You cannot manufacture presence. Either you show up or you don't. And the record of that, the real record, not the legal one, exists in the hearts of the people who witnessed it. My Aunt Colleen witnessed it. My father witnessed it. And on some level, I think Lydia and Cal witnessed it too. That's part of why it made them so angry. People who feel guilty often express it as accusation. That's not a judgment. It's just a pattern I've watched enough times now to recognize. What I want to say to anyone who's been where I was, carrying something true while someone else is loudly insisting on something false, is this: keep the receipts. Not because you're planning a fight. Keep them because truth deserves to be documented. Because the people who loved you deserve to have their words outlast the people trying to erase them. My father knew what he wanted. He said it clearly, more than once, on his own terms. All I did was make sure those words survived long enough to be heard. The house on Clement Drive is quiet in the mornings. I drink my coffee in his chair. I keep his change can on the refrigerator. And sometimes, when the light comes in just right and the neighborhood is still, I think about what it means to actually earn something. Not through cleverness or positioning, but through showing up, consistently, over a long stretch of ordinary time, for someone who needed you. That's all it was. That's all it ever was.